It was spring break of 1983, and the week included me falling off a dock and getting torn up by barnacles, a 12-foot alligator, and a capsized sailboat. But none of those impacted my life as much as the discovery of Dungeons and Dragons. Falling off the dock was just me being a clumsy 10-year-old, and it was Florida, so yeah, there were 12-foot alligators. The sailboat, though, that was actually kind of scary and probably was more dangerous than I realized at the time. But anyway, we're here to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. And I don't know what I hope to accomplish by this video, other than doing what I asked you to do in my last video. Sharing your D&D story. Maybe there's this space where we can share our stories about Dungeons & Dragons, and you can use the comments below to tell me what your D&D story is. And maybe in the future, when you invite new players to play, you can point them in this direction and they can read the comments that all of you contribute. And we have a kind of a catalog, assortment, assembly, archive, collection, assortment, a trove, a treasure trove of D&D stories that we could share with future gamers when we introduce them to the hobby of all these great and wonderful encounters, not D&D encounters, but encounters with Dungeons & Dragons that we've had and why we love this game so much. Am I building this up into too big of a thing? It could be fun. Or it could just be another video for this week and we'll move on to something different next week. That's how these things go sometimes, I guess. No, I think this is a good idea, actually, especially after last year, 2023, with all the WotC weirdness and crazy, you know what I'm talking about. What if we just kind of spent the next few weeks focusing on what we really love about this hobby and why we got into it in the first place and what it means to us? I think having a collection of those stories in one place might start 2024 off with a much different spin than 2023 started with. So my D&D story involves 3 pairs of brothers. Now, going back to 1983, I was hanging out at my grandfather's house for spring break, and his neighbor had 2 nephews who were about my age, and they were also visiting for spring break. And the older one is the one I flipped the sailboat with. The younger one, we kind of had trouble connecting. He was very much the outdoors type, and I was a big geek. I just wanted to play with my Star Wars action figures. But we found a way to connect over this. The Dungeons & Dragons basic set. And this is the Holmes version of the basic set. And that box set includes the adventure Keep on the Borderlands. And after we had played, and I knew we weren't going to play again, so it wasn't like cheating to look at the Dungeon Master's side of the game, I just remember looking at that Keep on the Borderlands dungeon map, the Caves of Chaos, over and over again, and just studying that map and being fascinated by the ability to take what was essentially graph paper and turn it into a fantastical setting called a dungeon. So fast forward a few months later, and I've been on the hunt for a while to try to find my own copy of that box set, and I found one. It's not the same. This is the Menser box set. I opened it up and I started to read it, and there was this amazing story, a choose-your-own-adventure style story that was designed to teach you how to play. And I don't know why every box set since then hasn't had one of these stories, because I found it at like 10 years old to be an excellent way to teach somebody how to play the game. And in that story, you play a fighter who delves into the dungeon, and you meet this beautiful cleric named Alina. And I'm pretty sure Alina was my first crush as a kid. So I was heartbroken when the wizard Bargle killed her with a magic missile. And there's this dramatic description as you flee the dungeon carrying her body to get it back to the temple in hopes of saving her life. And no, those bastards at the temple couldn't bring her back. But they gave her a proper burial, and then you promptly go shopping. This story at the beginning of the basic set does a great job of teaching you the component parts of D&D. You delve into the dungeon, you defeat the monsters, you face an evil wizard, you meet an NPC, you loot some treasure, somebody's gonna die, but then you take that treasure you looted and go buy new gear and make your character better, and then there's this thing where you level up. All sorts of cool incentives to keep playing the game, to keep exploring this fantasy world and developing a character that you get to shape, that you get to imagine. Not like Buck Rogers or Luke Skywalker or Flash Gordon. This was a character that I could shape, that I could tailor make and develop into the hero or the villain that I wanted to play. So I was both mortified, rest in peace, Alina, and excited to start playing this game, but I needed someone to play with, and that's when the coolest thing ever happened. The teacher said that tomorrow is the last day of school, so you can bring a book or a board game to play with your friends. So of course, I brought my D&D box set to school, and that's when I found out that my friend Daryl and his brother Travis, now we're on the second set of brothers, they played D&D too. Now, Daryl's older brother Travis, he was cool because he had advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And that's when I got my first exposure to the hardback books, and I bought my first D&D monster manual. So excited. Daryl, Travis, Chris, and I, we did our best to figure this game out and learn the rules, and we had a great time exploring dungeons and making all the terrible mistakes that you're not supposed to make. But we did, mostly unapologetically. In fact, I remember Daryl and I stormed out of Chris's house and walked home early, leaving Travis behind because we were so upset. I don't remember what it was about, but it was a big deal at the time. Overall, though, we learned the rules of the game and we learned to love Dungeons and Dragons, and it was great. Unfortunately, Daryl and Travis moved away, and that left me with just my friend Dave as the only other person I knew who played Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I'm pretty sure Dave had the Moldvay box set, but what he definitely had was the Monster Manual too, and that was cool. We set out to teach a whole bunch of new kids, anybody we could find. Well, really, we weren't that brave, but the kids in our neighborhood, we turned them on to Dungeons and Dragons. So another summer rolled around, and I think I'm probably 13 by now, and I went away to visit my dad, and that's when I met John and his brother. This is now the third set of brothers that played D&D, and their dad owned a game store. How cool was that? And at the game store was the first time I got to see a lot of other tabletop role-playing games. Up until that point, I only knew about Dungeons & Dragons and Traveler, a hard sci-fi RPG. But now, visiting this game store, I got exposed to Top Secret, an espionage game, the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game. There was even an Indiana Jones role-playing game. Like, there were so many different games to choose from, and we played the hell out of all these different games. John's dad also owned a copy of the original 1974 version of Dungeons and Dragons. So, of course, we had to play by those rules at least once that summer. And that's what we did. Now, the other thing that happened that summer was John's older brother ran a Dragonlance adventure. And I didn't know what Dragonlance was at that time. And man, was that cool. I quickly went out and bought the first of the trilogy, the Chronicles trilogy, Dragons of Autumn Twilight. And that was a cool read for a 13-year-old kid. Awesome. Now, looking back on it now, the book doesn't hold up nearly as well. Save the comments for your cool stories. You don't need to bash on the Dragonlance Chronicles. I know they're not perfect. But to a 14-year-old, 13-year-old kid, they were cool as hell. And that's when I went back home, and my friend Sean was also reading that series. And that's when our games evolved from the ugly adversarial dungeon crawling games into epic campaigns of amazing adventure. In fact, my friend Rich started a campaign that Sean continued, and next thing you know, we had played a Dragonlance campaign that lasted 7 years. At least 7 years. Now, during that time, we also played a whole bunch of other games, including the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle role-playing game, Top Secret SI, Shadowrun, West End Star Wars. There was a whole bunch of different role-playing games we played during that time, and we even branched out into strategy games like Risk and Axis and Allies, and this crazy new game called Warhammer 40,000. But that's a whole nother story. That's a whole nother can of worms. But during that time, I also met my friend Rob, and Rob's family had a basement. Now, I say that because in Florida, pretty hard to find a house with a basement, but we actually got to play on a regular basis Dungeons and Dragons in a basement, just like Stranger Things. In fact, when I watched the first season of Stranger Things, I'm like, This is my childhood. Thankfully, the monsters weren't real and none of our friends were eaten. So that was good. But that was Dungeons and Dragons and life in the late 80s. Now, of course, somewhere in there was the whole satanic panic thing, but I'm dyslexic and I have ADHD, and my mom kind of set the whole, like, this could possess your soul stuff to the side because I was actually reading avidly. So I guess my mom figured my academics were more important than my eternal soul. It was definitely a concern, and there were multiple discussions throughout my teen years about, is this really a dangerous thing that you're... No, it's not, Ma. It's okay. It's going to be okay. In fact, it was, because I'm still here. So by the time we finished that 7-year-long Dragonlance campaign, we were adults. We were grown and finished college. Some of us had moved out of the city. Some of us had moved out of the state. Rob was even living out of the country. But those memories, those amazing stories, united us. Even to this day, I'm still in touch with most of those friends. And those memories, as great as they were unique to us. And they had nothing to do with first edition or BECMI or second edition D&D or West End Games or FASA or TSR. No edition of D&D, no game company was responsible for those memories. They were ours. Mine. Now, if you've had a discouraging experience or you're having trouble finding a group, let me encourage you. I've been there too, and there's been times where I moved to a new city and didn't have anyone to play with, but eventually I found new people who were interested in the game, and it conveniently was right about the time 3rd edition came out, and we all learned the new edition together, and that was very reminiscent of those early years when I was first learning how to play 1st edition. And I had a similar experience years later when I moved to another new city, and this time I was more confident, and I went searching for a location and found a comic book shop that was willing to let me run games there, and that's when I started playing 5th edition with a whole new group of friends. That's the great thing about Dungeons and Dragons. It helps you develop life skills and communication and perspective taking and self-awareness and empathy and creativity and critical thinking and problem solving. And all of those things are wrapped up in these cool, epic adventures of heroes and villains. And it's just, I'm at a loss for words for how unique a good role-playing game experience is. But it's that. It's all of that and more in this unique package. And it's amazing. And I think if you're tuning in and you made it this far in this video, you know what I'm talking about. And you've experienced some version of that amazingness. And that's what's so important to remember as we enter a new year with a new edition of D&D and all these other new games that are coming out. It's not about Wizards of the Coast or Paizo or Cobalt Press or Modifius or any of these other companies. It's about your experience with your friends and how you want to curate and create that experience. It's about you. It's not about this edition or this game or that game. It's about you and your story.